We're going to go ahead and get started. We are glad to have you today to this webinar presented by LeBaron Carroll Insurance, and LNHR Consulting is going to be doing the presenting for us today with Maren McKenna taking on that task. Maren, we're grateful to have you. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to present on kind of an uncomfortable but really important topic, which is unconscious bias. And I think we're going to have some really cool insights today. And I hope that everybody that joins us today will be able to take a lot out of it and help improve, just how we think about thinking about managing. So I'll go ahead and hop right in. I'm Maren McKenna, and I am an HR manager for LNHR Consulting. And today we're going to really kind of hit on something that all of us have. It's part of human nature, but it definitely affects the way that we, see the world. And so it's important as we're going through this training, we kind of reflect on, well, how has this information affected the way that I manage my employees, affected the way that I'm hiring people, affected the way that I'm, training people and giving them opportunities for advancement. Unconscious bias kind of seeps into everything that we do. And that it's not always a bad thing, but it's just something that the more we're aware of how that bias is affecting our decision-making, the more control we have over making sure that those decisions are the best decisions. So I'm going to go ahead and hop right in. So today, this is kind of the agenda. We'll do an introduction. We'll talk about what unconscious bias actually looks like, how it shows itself in the workplace. We'll talk about what you can do to discover your own biases, and then kind of do a wrap-up summary. Like I said, today's topic really affects our decision-making, our interactions, and just the overall learning environment within any sector of business. So unconscious bias, like the definition, is the automatic association of stereotypes or attitudes towards a particular group of people, which influences our decisions without our awareness. So that's the unconscious part, right? It can impact our interactions with others, our hiring decisions, and even the way that we're evaluating staff performances. It's important to remember, like unconscious bias, it's automatic. It's involuntary, and we're making these judgments about people based on perceived characteristics. So things like race, gender, and age. And there are plenty of other factors that we make these judgments on. And they can influence our actions and decisions without us realizing that that's happening at all. These biases are rooted in your preference for or against something, and that can lead to both favorable and unfavorable bias. So sometimes having a bias can actually improve a relationship because, you have something in common with somebody. And we'll talk about that as we get into the presentation. And sometimes it can actually prevent somebody from making a connection with you because you don't see that common characteristic. So an example of that could be like, I had a great experience in college. So I think that other people that went to my school would be a really good fit for the role because I know that they also got a great education. Or I think that everybody from a certain generation is lazy and unmotivated. You can see how having those ideas without even like thinking about them consciously might affect who I would invite for an interview. Because I can see, the year that somebody graduated or the school that somebody graduated from, I might be more interested in having a shared connection with somebody. Or I might not be as interested in hearing about somebody's experience because I don't see that shared connection. And in the context of managing teams, understanding unconscious bias is really essential. It can play a significant role in how we're hiring, promoting, evaluating, and interacting with our employees and our coworkers. A statistic about unconscious bias that I think is interesting is, according to SHRM, which is, the HR regulatory board in the US, 68% of organizations have implemented strategies to reduce bias in their hiring processes. because the U.S. Department of Labor highlighted that unconscious bias can actually lead to discrimination, which affects 90% of job seekers. So that's obviously the majority of people looking for jobs in the country are affected by unconscious bias, either preferably or discriminatorily. So we're looking at how can we make sure that we're trying to be conscious about making those decisions for our company. So we all have both conscious and unconscious biases. We evolved that way. It's a human trait because having those biases was one way we were able to categorize information into our brain using shortcuts. And that allowed our ancestors to quickly differentiate between things like safety and danger. So it is, human nature to have these. And this presentation shouldn't be presenting it as that unconscious bias is always a negative thing. It's just something that the more we're aware of it, the more control we have over it. So these biases can show up as a preference. They could be based on stereotypes. They could be based on our own experiences or the experiences of people around us. Maybe somebody has told us about something and now we've taken that information in. They could be based in observations or assumptions. They actually might not even be based in any kind of reality of a situation whatsoever. It's just what our brain automatically goes to. So we want to look at ways that these biases can affect our decision-making when it comes to our roles. So one of the big things that we see, and one of the things that a lot of the researchers are focusing on, is how does bias come into the hiring process? So this bias in hiring can manifest when an unconscious stereotype would impact our decision in the hiring process. So, for example, an assumption about a candidate's fit based on their background or their appearance. You may have heard about this study before. It is pretty big in business circles, but a study mentioned in the Harvard Business Review found that resumes that have ethnic-sounding names receive 30% fewer callbacks. Like I said, sometimes your unconscious bias can appear favorable towards people who have the same characteristics as you, such as culture, religion, or race. But your unconscious biases can also appear unfavorable towards people who have characteristics that are unlike yours. So even just having a name at the top of a page that has nothing to do with the rest of what the resume says might kind of get into the back of someone's mind as, oh, I'm not sure that they're the right fit for this role based on, stereotypes that your brain automatically jumps to when reading what that is. So what we want to do is try to mitigate that bias and involve some best practices. And that could be something like blind resume screenings. That's where you're looking at resumes without any information about the candidate's details present. So, their name and dates and things are removed. So you're just looking at what is their experience and how does that experience relate to the role that you're hiring for. It could be ensuring that your hiring panel is diverse. So including different levels in the organization, including different experiences, including different ages, different races, as diverse as you can possibly get so that you are essentially reflecting what you want your company to look like. And also implementing structured interviews. So things like determining the criteria before having the interview. So you have job descriptions that are very thorough and ready to go. You have interview questions already there, and you're asking those same questions to every single candidate. That doesn't mean that you can't ask follow-up questions based on what their answers are, but it means that every single candidate that comes through the hiring panel is asked at least this same amount of questions, so that there aren't any possibilities for discrimination in what they were asked. And then having a rating criteria, especially one that's really thorough, that's looking for the key things that you need for that role. So as structured of an interview as you can have, the less that unconscious bias can kind of come in and make a decision for you. There can be bias in once you even have somebody hired, promoting and training your staff. So it can significantly impact the promotion or training of staff because it can lead to things like preferential treatment or based on the subjective perceptions rather than the merit or qualifications that employee is showing. That can hinder diversity and inclusion efforts. It can limit opportunities for deserving employees, and it can create barriers to talent development within the organization. Sometimes unconscious bias could be very obvious, but it can also be really subtle. Something like a mentor selecting an employee that reminds them of themselves as a mentee, and then they start to offer them some extra advice or extra time with them. And in that case, the favorable unconscious bias could result in increased access to the mentor's time and guidance, which could help set that employee up for success, which is not a bad thing. But you have to think about why was that mentee chosen. So again, things like having a mentorship program where there's criteria for who is assigned a mentee and who's included in those mentorship programs, clear promotion criteria, and ongoing diversity and inclusion training are important because if you have that criteria laid out, then you can be looking at how somebody's merit and qualifications are lined up versus, oh, I really like that person. I want to see them succeed. Or I don't really like that person, so I'm not going to invite them to be in the mentorship program. You also see this when we're evaluating staff. So you might see in performance evaluations things like the halo effect or affinity bias come into play. And I'll talk about what each of those is. So the halo effect is the tendency for a positive impression to positively influence an opinion or feeling. So when an evaluator is influenced by their previous judgments or performance or personality, that can fall into this thing that we call the halo effect. So it's important when you're evaluating staff that you're looking at the time frame in which the evaluation takes place and what that employee has done just within that time frame. So if you're looking at a yearly evaluation, you're going to look at what that employee has done within that year, not what the employee has done within the entire time that they've come. Because maybe they had an amazing month 5 years ago, and well, that's great. They've already been rewarded for that amazing month 5 years ago. You want to look at what are they actually doing now and look at it in comparison to what the rest of their team is doing now so that you can really fairly judge them on what their performance is like at this time. And also to remember that just because you like somebody as a person doesn't necessarily mean that they're always the right person for the job or that they can't use that extra guidance or support, especially when you're thinking about evaluating them. So because you like somebody doesn't mean that you shouldn't comment on things that they need to improve on. So halo effect is kind of like, well, I know that they're really good and in the past they showed me they're good, so I'm going to just consider them good regardless of what's happening right now. And then affinity bias is the tendency to favor people who share similar interests or backgrounds or experiences with us. So that's kind of like the example that I gave earlier about, oh, well, I love going to college and this person's gone to the same college as me, so we have this connection. So I have an affinity towards them. When somebody shares a similar interest or background or experience with us, we tend to feel more comfortable around them. And we can unconsciously reject those who act or look different to us. So again, when we're evaluating staff, it's really important that we're following our rubric. We're making sure that all of our decisions are based on their performance and their performance during that set period of time that we are reviewing. And not on any unconscious bias that we have about that person. And this isn't to say that you shouldn't like, people that you work with, but just that when you are evaluating somebody, you're evaluating them on the pieces of the job that are important for them to be evaluated on, and that we're evaluating everyone that does that job on the same things. So some tools for unbiased evaluations look like implementing standardized criteria, regular calibration meetings. So meeting up with other managers that are doing evaluations and seeing how are your evaluations stacking up against theirs. Are you using the same types of language? Are you having meetings when you're evaluating staff that are lasting the same amount of time, if I feel like, oh, anytime my manager talks about my performance, they only talk to me for 3 minutes, but this other manager spends an hour with each person, really delving into how they can improve and what things that they're doing well. I might start to feel like, well, my manager doesn't really care about me, or that they think that this evaluation is just a checkbox activity and they're not really helping me to grow in my performance. According to a report by the Harvard Business Review, studies have shown that bias can significantly impact the performance evaluations in the workplace. For instance, there was one study that found women were 1.4 times more likely than men to receive critical subjective feedback. So things like being told that they need to step up their game or they need to be more confident. So on the same team, women were getting this feedback much more than men were getting this feedback. Additionally, there was another study done by the Harvard Business Review that revealed that performance ratings for Black employees were significantly lower compared to their white counterparts, even when their actual performance was similar. So again, it's really important that when you're evaluating staff that you are using standardized criteria, because that way it's really easy to demonstrate not only to the staff why you gave them that rating, but also to try to make sure that you are fairly giving that rating based on what the actual performance is like. So again, it's really important to think that we're talking about unconscious bias here. So these are processes that are going on in the back of our minds that we may not know much about because we are doing them without thinking about them. So how do you actually discover and reflect on these biases when you don't actively know that they're happening? So again, at times we are going to naturally rely on our experiences, especially when we're in situations where we feel like we're under pressure, when we're interacting with anybody in our community, including other team members. So it's really easy to make judgments within the first few seconds. We all have conscious and unconscious biases, but the focus is not about labeling them as right or wrong. It's about identifying them and knowing that they exist and understanding how to overcome them so that they don't create a negative experience for our employees. So your individual behavior in this case matters in every single one of these circumstances. So understanding that you might have certain biases towards certain groups of people or people with certain experiences matters when you're hiring people. It matters when you're training them. It matters when you are looking to give promotions. It matters to the entire employee life cycle. So one way that you can start to identify things is by taking something called an implicit associations test. And I would definitely recommend writing down the web address that you see here of implicit.harvard.edu. It's a really interesting way to look at what associations you might be making about thinking about them. So there are tons and tons of books out there about unconscious bias that you can read. There are plenty of trainings that dive even deeper into specific types of unconscious biases. But one pretty easy and quick way, I think each one of these tests takes about 10 minutes to do, is to hop online and take one of these tests. So the IAT is available. It's online. It's free of charge via Project Implicit, which is part of a Harvard Review study. It is a psychological tool that was developed by researchers at Harvard that measures unconscious bias or implicit associations that you might have towards certain groups, concepts, or ideas. And it works by assessing the strength of automatic associations between concepts in memory. And the test itself, it'll maybe show you some pictures, and you just have to click on which picture that you think is associated with the word that they give you. It really is a pretty interesting tool. The test can uncover implicit biases related to race, gender, age, other social categories. There are quite a few tests that you can take. It's a valuable tool for understanding how your bias might influence your behavior and decision-making, both in personal and professional contexts. And like I said, every single human being has these. So These tests aren't to like show that you have them or you don't, or to show that you're a good person or a bad person. It's just to show how your brain might automatically be jumping to some of these conclusions. There are some shortcomings to this. This is not, perfect science by any means, but it's still a useful tool for awareness of your own biases, especially when they're running in the background and you're not sure that they're happening. I took one just the other day, and I'm going to show you the results that you can get. So once you've taken a test, and this test specifically was about age discrimination. So in this case, the IAT was measuring associations between the concepts of young people and old people and the evaluation between good and bad. It would have me, click on two different buttons, whether I thought somebody's picture looked old or young, and then it would start giving me words that sounded good or bad. And I had to click if I thought that word, like amazing, was a good word or a bad word. And then it would start asking me, it would mix them up and make me do young and good and old and bad. And then it would switch it to old and good and young and bad. And it kind of takes into account how quickly I'm able to click on that button to the next slide. And if there's a difference between when I'm clicking for young and good or old and good or young and bad. So, and then it summarizes the data. So you can see that the web respondents that have taken this test, a lot of them have strong or moderate automatic preferences for young people compared to old people, which is interesting. And like I said, this can help you to just have an idea about what your brain is thinking about in the background when you're looking at somebody's experience. If you slightly have a preference for younger people than older people, then that might be something that you have to realize when you're in the hiring process that, okay, I need to make sure that I'm judging somebody based on, do they have the pieces of experience or education or whatever we're looking for that are going to be able to make them applicable for this role? Are they the right person for the role based purely on what their experience, education, etc., what we're looking for versus do they have the age? Am I thinking, because this person is older than XYZ, or because this person is younger XYZ? We want to really look at, are their merits up to what we're looking for versus is their age? So it's just an example of what the implicit association test looks like. And again, I would recommend taking it, and it could be an interesting tool for using in teams as well. You want to try to be self-aware and also aware of others. So the first step to managing your unconscious bias is to be aware that they exist. We all have them, and they are rooted in the preferences for or against something. So if you reflect on your own story and think about how the events have shaped your values, how they affect the way that you perceive others, and how they affect the way that you interact with others, that's kind of the first step to understanding how you might be acting in a way that is biased towards or against something. So in order to reduce your own bias, you want to try to find something that places the person in the same category as you. You want to surround yourself with images that defy stereotypes. You want to try to actively pursue relationships with different types of people and make connections and focus on the positive. It's important that you yourself are as open to diversity in the way people think, the way people act, the way people live their lives. And that doesn't mean that you have to change the way that you think and act to live your life, just that you understand that not everyone is like us. And those people that are not like us are not necessarily good or bad. And trying to just be open to those experiences makes those biases less effective in your brain when you come into decision making. Once you have kind of started to discover where the biases may lie, especially if you have strong biases one way or the other, you want to start to manage your behavior. So once you become aware of it, you need to be mindful of how you respond to others, and you need to take responsibility for your actions. It's all of our job to be champions of our core values and of dignity and respect in the workplace. So again, just because somebody might be coming from a different place than you or might have different experiences than you have, doesn't mean that they shouldn't be respected for having those values. As a manager or an owner or a team lead, it's all of our jobs to build cultural awareness within the company. It's not about us, just checking a box. It's about learning more about other people, because the more you learn about other people, the more interactions you have with other people, the more open that you are to them. If we can recognize that we all have a story and we all have unconscious biases, it's important to incorporate practices that treat others the way that they want to be treated, that golden rule. And being culturally aware and promoting cultural awareness in our teams helps all of us to treat others with that dignity and respect. There are a couple ways that we can do that. One is to just continuously learn, educate yourself about different cultures through books and documentaries and conversations. Try to stay open, approach interactions with an open mind, and try to avoid judgments based on stereotypes. Or if you catch yourself starting to fall into thinking about something that you realize is based on stereotype, try to think about why that's happening. Have more experiences. Try to seek out cultural experiences like festivals or trying new foods. Making those connections with somebody else's background can help, just to expand what your knowledge is about their background, and also helps you to empathize with them. So trying to put yourself in their shoes and understand what their perspectives are. Engage in respectful dialogue with people from diverse backgrounds, and then reflect on how your own culture shapes your own worldview. And ultimately, it's about respect, showing respect for cultural differences and creating inclusive environments. And if you think about, being able to do all these things and be open, that's going to have a positive impact on things like your hiring process and your overall work environment. If the people that work for you feel like it is a place where it is inclusive of differences and that there is that cultural awareness there, they're going to enjoy working there more. So there are some interaction tips when you're interacting with coworkers and clients and members of our community. You can be aware that there are triggers in yourself and others. So if you think about what are things that I have very strong biases towards or against, I need to be aware of how those can trigger my behavior, and again, own what behavior that is. You want to remember that you are likely to favor people who are like you. Again, that's just human nature. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you want to remember that when you are faced with somebody who is like you and you're having a good connection with them, not to overly favor them over other coworkers, and vice versa. Maybe you're working with somebody who has just a completely different life experience than you have, and you don't want to discriminate against them because of that. You want to be open to understanding and empathizing with them. Try not to make assumptions about individuals. We all know the saying about making assumptions. And it really is true that we don't know why somebody does something. We don't know, their full background. And we can never fully understand what it's like to be someone else. But again, being open to having that understanding helps us to make better decisions. Try to be aware of your body language as well as your verbal language. If I am an employee and I've been called in to have a discussion about my performance with my manager, when I walk in, my manager's sitting there with his arms crossed and he has a scowl on his face. Even if it has nothing to do with what my interaction is, I'm automatically going to start going on the defensive. I'm going to be afraid of what that interaction is going to be. I might not even be able to really hear what's being said to me. So try to put yourself in a good mind space and in a place where you're open and ready to have a two-way conversation when you are interacting with people. Even if you've had a bad day or you just hung up the phone about something really horrible happening, if you need to reschedule things, but don't bring that energy into a conversation with your employee and expect to have a really good interaction. And then always try to base your decisions on facts and information rather than your gut instinct. Now, there are times in business where having that gut instinct can absolutely play to our favor. But when it comes to things like hiring decisions and promotions and those kind of things, they really do need to be based on fact, and they really do need to be based or coming from a place where all factors were really considered. If you're just jumping based on your gut, then you might end up in a situation where you have either unfairly promoted somebody based on something that you appreciate about them, but not considered something else that might have been a better fit or just as good of a fit. And that can look like discrimination. And obviously that is something that we want to avoid, not only because that can have a really big drag on the morale of your teams, but also because in order to, promote fairly, we want to make sure that it's the right person getting those promotions. So again, we want to remember that we all have unconscious bias. It is human nature. I've said that a couple times. I hope you take that in. This is not about saying you're a good person because you don't have any biases, or you're a bad person because you are biased. All humans are biased. It is the way that our brain automatically works. But if we can be self-aware of where our biases lie and understand how we can manage that, that can have a huge impact when we're interacting with others, both professionally and in our personal lives. If you can understand how it affects your management, if you can acknowledge the presence of the biases that you have, if you can, then that allows you to actively challenge them. And it allows you to implement strategies that might mitigate any impact that they would have on the business, such as, like I said, using objective criteria for decision making and fostering an inclusive work environment where all of the voices are heard and valued and feel like they can speak up. It's a difficult thing to really reflect on your own biases, and sometimes it can be very uncomfortable to do that. But ultimately, it's going to pay off if you are able to sit there and think about how does your own life experience affect how you view the world, and how can that view be affecting how you make your decisions within your business. So that is kind of the end of the spiel on unconscious bias. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have, or talk about any further information, try to give you any information that you might be looking for about this topic.
Well, thank you, Maren. That was absolutely wonderful. If anyone who is online with us does have a question, feel free to either throw it in the chat or as a Q&A topic. We'll give you a few seconds to throw something in there if you'd like to. Maren, if one of our attendees wants to get in touch with you or LNHR, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the easiest way to get in touch with us is to send an email to hr@lnhrconsulting.com. And I can type that in the chat for everybody so they can see that. And then it can be, given to any of the managers that work with us, and we can make sure that that information is given to the person that's the most expert in that subject and get back to you.
And if you wouldn't mind, maybe just quickly, can you give us a 15-second overview of some of the things LNHR can help a business with?
Absolutely. And we really can help with pretty much everything. We will kind of stretch it and try to go above and beyond in any way. But ultimately, what we can do is act as kind of a one-stop shop for any HR business needs that you might have. So whether you're struggling with a specific thing, like you have a difficult employee situation that you're trying to manage, or you need to figure out how to implement an HRIS system to better, track attendance and that kind of stuff, or you really just need, advice on how end to end to deal with, the employee experience from hiring all the way to termination. we can kind of step in and do that. We have multiple levels within our consulting group. So there are quite a few managers who can come in and manage a full project. We can build projects based on, the specific needs that your company has. And we can also kind of be an on-call source of information when things kind of happen last minute and you're not quite sure what to do with them.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again. And looks like we didn't get any questions. So we'll go ahead and call it then. Just so everyone knows, this video from this webinar today will be made available next week. We'll send that out to everyone who attended today so that you can use as needed. So thank you again, Maren, and thank you everyone for being here with us today.
Absolutely.
Have a good day.